Hello. I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to trickle in, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so let's get started. First, welcome to my first webinar on music theory. Glad you could join me. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be covering today is inside of my best-selling book, Music Theory in One Lesson. What I'd like to cover today is a good foundation for building chord progressions as well as melodies that line up with those chord progressions. This information can literally be used by any musician, not only for writing music, but for playing music much more easily. As in all languages, and oftentimes music is considered a language, understanding the grammar helps in speaking the language considerably. So first off, what we need to look at is the all-important question: what is a note? The answer to that is quite simple. A note is just a vibration in the air. And we can represent that for our purposes today just as a simple squiggle. So if you take a look at the screen, we're going to see my masterful art skills making what a note looks like in the air. It's a frequency, and it goes up and down like a wave and basically repeats and repeats and repeats until the note stops. Now, it's really important to understand that this is the basis of music for a couple reasons. One, it's going to show us that what is actually important is not just any given note, but how those notes interact with other notes around it. And two, it's also going to allow us to conceptualize what kind of notes to pick. For example, if I play another note at the same time, what's going to happen is that note is now going to interact with the other note in the air. And if you see, there are points where these notes intersect. And music theory, in its essence, is just a way of explaining how each of those notes interact with each other. If I have 500 points of intersection between note A and note B in a given range, as opposed to 3, you're actually going to hear a different effect. I'm going to pick up my guitar here and kind of illustrate that. So first, I'm playing 2 notes that are actually the same frequency. Well, if my guitar was in tune. So what happens when I move one of those notes just a little bit, we're going to get a lot of intersection. Those notes clash a lot in the air. And if I give them just a little bit more space, they're going to clash less and less each time. Now, that is really very, very important to understand, because when we go to build entire chord progressions and pick melodies based off of those chord progressions, or even vice versa, pick chord progressions based off of melodies, we're going to want to keep our spacing in mind. So how do we represent notes in music? Well, that's actually quite simple. We just use letters and we call it our musical alphabet. Our musical alphabet goes from A to G. And after you reach G, you go back to A. Now, that's not saying you go back down to A like that. It actually just keeps repeating essentially into infinity. Even outside of our hearing range, theoretically. I mean, I guess if you wanted to write music that only dogs could hear, you could do that. So why does the musical alphabet repeat? Well, it's actually quite simple. The musical alphabet repeats because at a certain point, one frequency is going to be exactly twice the other frequency. And that's going to kind of create a bit of an auditory illusion where, let's say we have one frequency here and the other goes exactly twice as fast. They're actually going to be crossing each other at the x-axis, and it's going to sound like it's one note. So I'm going to go ahead and play that in for you now. Those sound very much like the same note because, well, they're both A's. And one actually oscillates at exactly twice the frequency of the other. So if I were to take one of those notes and move it, much like I did with the previous example, I'd get kind of the same effect. And if you hear, it kind of has that same effect as, right? The notes start to clash in the air. Knowing this is also incredibly important when it comes to writing music because therein lies our spacing, and we want to write music based off of good spacing or even crunchier spacing if that is the type of music we're trying to write. So in short, this little introduction part, and we're going to get to something a little bit more meatier, our harmonic map here in just a moment. In short, notes are only important based off of the other notes around it. All notes have relative value. Next, we're going to take a look at our harmonic map. Sorry, just a moment. Thank you, Mel. Okay, so hopefully you printed this off before the lecture. This harmonic map is going to show you how to write your own music, and you're going to be able to do this very, very easily. So the first thing I want you to notice about this harmonic map are the major patterns and the minor patterns, as well as our musical alphabet here. Now we have some extra characters, and I'm going to explain those for you here in just a moment. But I want you to first take a look at major pattern versus minor pattern. We have a bunch of W's and H's. Those represent what are called whole and half steps in music. So what are whole and half steps? Well, half steps are quite simple. It's just one of these notes to the next. Right? So A to B flat there, that little B looking thing is a flat, is a half step. Then up to B is another half step, to C, a half step, to D flat, a half step. Now, we can create whole steps out of these half steps, and that's quite simple. It's just two half steps, right? So A to B would be our whole step. So our patterns down here, the major pattern and the minor pattern, are going to be a succession of whole and half steps. Let's take a moment to take a closer look at our chromatic scale and also examine the notes in between those natural notes which we looked at earlier. So first we have sharps and flats. So sharps are those number signs, and flats are those little B's. Now, an A sharp and a B flat, you guessed it. Yes, those are the same frequency. Now, it seems kind of silly to have two names for one note. And, you know, unless we were to go a little bit further in, it would be perfectly silly. But here in a moment, it's going to become fairly obvious why we have sharps as well as flats. So a C sharp and a D flat are the same note. We may call it one or the other depending on what scale we end up using. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Another thing that I'd like you to take notice of is that B and C are a half step apart and E and F are a half step apart. However, all of the other natural notes are an entire whole step apart. That's very, very easy to remember if you just remembered the odd men out, which in this case, B and C and E and F. Every other note's going to have a whole step. And if you ever get confused or lost, well, that's what the harmonic map is for. The harmonic map is your tool for navigating the musical forest. So first, let's take a look at our major pattern and use it to not only come up with a scale, but also come up with a chord progression and perhaps even a nice melody we can play over that chord progression. Okay, so we are going to start on A as our root note. That is your first step. Pick the note that you are starting on. Then we're going to follow through with the major pattern. So our first thing is a whole step. So that brings us to B. Next, another whole step brings us to C sharp. A half step brings us to D. A whole step, E. Another whole step, we get F sharp. Another whole step, we get G sharp. Now, it looks like we're out of room here, but remember, the alphabet repeats. So we're just going to grab our A there. Now, this is what's called the A major scale. Why? Well, it's the major pattern starting on A. If we were to use the minor pattern, we'd call it A minor. So in music, you'll find that everything is named for exactly what it is. No strange names. We wouldn't call something A major and have it start on the note C and use a different pattern other than major. Musicians don't want to be considered rocket scientists. They want to be artists. So keep in mind that everybody that developed this system of music theory understood that and wanted to be very, very clear with their naming. So we have our A major scale. Let's take a listen to that. And backwards. Okay. So how do we use this scale to populate our harmonic map and create a really nice chord progression? Well, first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write our scale along the bottom here just a couple times out. So we have A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A again, right? So first off, I'd like you to notice the numbers above the scale here. Those numbers are very important. Those are what's called scale degrees, and they're going to be absolutely critical when it comes to creating our chords. And we're going to take a look at that here in just one moment. So we're going to do 3 chords in this key. And then we're going to write a nice little melody to go over top of it. So how do we build chords? That's a good question. And the answer is actually rather simple. So we're going to start with what is called the 1 chord in A. Oops, sorry, that's an awful looking 1. Still getting used to writing on tablets. And as you can see, my handwriting is not always the best. So why would we call this a 1 chord? Well, quite simply, starts on 1. If you take a look, 1, lines up with 1 right there. And how do we figure out the rest of the notes in the chord? Well, let's just take every other note until we have 3, and that is our most basic chord. So if I were to play A, C sharp, and E all at the same time, I would have what's called the A major chord. Let's take a listen. It's a nice chord. So we have A, C sharp, E. Well, let's go even further. Let's do our next chord here. We're going to build this off of the 3rd scale degree. And that would be, you guessed it, a 3 chord. So let's take a look. 3 is our root because it's a 3 chord. So that being the root, we're going to take every other note until we have 3. C sharp, E, G sharp. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. So what if we played one after another? So as you can see, we can actually play a nice chord progression based off of this. Well, let's pick our next one. Let's do a 5 chord. Now 5 would be our E. Now what we're going to do here is take every other note until we have 3. And I'll circle this B over there too. All right. So here we have a nice chord progression. We have A major. Then we have C sharp minor. And then we have E major. And as you can hear, those chords line up rather nicely. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the melodies that we can map out using this. This is really very, very cool. Now, the first thing you want to look at is the voicings that we have here. So I'm going to color code one voice versus another. So this first voice would have a melody like this: A, C sharp, and B. So if we listened to that, it would sound like this. Right? Now, the next melody we can spot pretty simply. We would have C sharp, E, and E. So we get C sharp, E, E. After that, we have E, G sharp, and G sharp. Now, what happens if we take this chord progression, these 3 melodies, and play each melody over top the other? What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my looper pedal that I have hooked up to this live stream. And I'm going to play each melody in one at a time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play each note 4 times. So my A, C sharp, E melody is going to sound like this. A, C sharp, C sharp, C sharp, C sharp, and so forth. So we have A, C sharp, B, C sharp, E, 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 G sharp, G sharp. Let's take a listen. Okay, there's my first melody. Next, I'm going to play in the other 2 melodies. as you can hear, we have a really nice melody, that set of melodies that line up to make an entire chord progression. So this has a lot of uses for a lot of musicians. As a music producer, you can use this map to fill in a piano roll. If you're a guitarist like I am, you can use this map to find nice solos through this, which is what we're about to do here in just a moment. The uses are really endless. All instruments play these notes. This one map can lead you through the musical forest, whether or not you have a clarinet, your voice, or a guitar. So let's talk about how we would use this to create a nice sounding lead over what we're hearing now. The first thing that we want to keep into account is the notes that we're using. So of course we can use A, C sharp, E, C sharp, E, G sharp, B, E, G sharp, and those would all sound nice. But we also want to be able to artfully miss notes. Right, so not all of those notes belonged in that chord progression. Most of them did. And your ear could probably pick up the ones that didn't, because they sound as if they need to resolve. This note is D, and as you can hear, there are no Ds in the chord progression. But when I play the C sharp after it, it just sounds that much better. So there is a basic chord progression. Next, let's take a look at using another scale, as well as discover why we'd want to have sharps as well as flats in our chromatic scale. Okay, so now that I've deleted that off my looper, let's pick another root note. This root note that I'm going to pick is F. So we're going to start on F, and we're going to use the major pattern. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the chromatic scale that has the sharps in it. And when we go through this, you're going to find out why we would want to use the flat version instead of the sharp. But let's just make a mistake on purpose to kind of clarify this. So our major pattern, whole step to G, a whole step, and that's going to take us to A. Because remember, we're repeating. But for the sake of space, I'm just going to say, oh, we're going back there. Another half step to A sharp. Whole step to C. Whole step to D. Whole step to E. And now we're back at F, right? So we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, you'll notice something peculiar. We have an A and an A sharp, but we don't have any B. There's no B. We have F, G, A sharp, C, D, E. And that's rather awkward. What we want is a complete alphabet. So if I were to take the very same notes using the flat iteration, you'll notice that we actually have F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. And that's why we use sharps as well as flats. So let's go ahead and fill in our harmonic map. Oopsies. All right, that's awesome. So now we have our kind of clay drudged up. Let's sculpt it into something else. So I'm going to start this first one with the 1 chord. But let's do something a little bit different in this iteration. The next chord, let's make it a 4. So the 4, our B flat, D, and F. After that, let's do 2. So G, B flat, and D. And after that, let's go ahead and do 5. C, E, of course, our G, and I'll circle this G over there. Okay, so now we have an F major chord, a B flat major chord, a G minor chord, and then a C major chord. But let's pull this apart into separate melodies like we did with our last one. So our first melody would be F, B flat, G, and G. Our second melody, A, D, D, and C. Actually, let's make this a little bit easier on ourselves. So you'd actually have A, D, B flat, and C. After that, C, F, D, and E. So what I'm going to do, just like with the last one, I'm going to play these melodies one at a time into the looper so that you can hear the effect. I'm going to play each note 4 times. Okay, there's my first melody. Now, using my map, I can find bass notes, other notes to add into the melody. Let's do an easy bass line. Those are all using notes from that scale. Okay, let's do one with a minor scale. And then we're going to talk about some general applications of this information for you and your music. So, we're going to pick a root note for a minor progression. And this root note, I'm going to go ahead and arbitrarily pick it as G. Okay, so if we look at the minor pattern, we're going to go a whole step, which takes us to A, a half step to B flat, another whole to C, another whole to D, a half to E flat, a whole to F, and then a whole takes us back to G. So we're going to take the same route that we took for the other progression. So this one, G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, and G. G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, and G. Let's do one more iteration. We'll do a 3-chord progression here. Okay, great. Now, our first chord is good to just start with the 1, especially with a basic format like we have today. Next, let's go ahead and do a 6 chord. I always like 1 to 6 in minor. I think that it just sounds great. Now, I'm getting that B flat because, again, we're taking every other note, right? Just like we did before with the other chords. Next, after that, let's go ahead and do a 5. Okay. So we can get as creative as we want with these melodies, but I'm just going to take the ones that pop out most easily here. So melody 1, G, B flat, and A. Melody 2, B flat, E flat, and D. Melody 3, D, G, and F. So I'm going to do this just like the last ones, where I play each note 4 times. And as you can hear, like before, we have a very, very pleasing chord progression. Different styles of music use different spacings. And according to the type of music that you will want to play, you will need to look at what kinds of spacings to use. There are a lot of resources for this, including my book, Music Theory in One Lesson, which I think is the best resource, as well as, just generally looking at other people's music and doing a little bit of analysis. Analysis helps quite a lot. So now you know how to use this harmonic map. You can pick any root note for a scale, fill it in, and start picking chord progressions as well as melodies that can go in those chord progressions. Then all you have left to do at that point is to quite simply arrange those notes for the instruments that you'll be playing with, and there you go. So if we were to take a progression like this and say, how would two, say for example, guitars play this? Now, I'm sitting here with a guitar in my lap, so of course that's why I picked it, but we can also pick other instruments. Now, when you look at chords are not just something that you play on one instrument. Chords are actually played between groups of people. So if we had 2 guitars, we could have one guitar playing a portion of the chord while the other guitar plays the other portion of the chord. And together they actually make that type of harmony. Let's give that a shot using this chord progression. So 1, we're going to do a G minor chord. So the first guitar, I'm going to have just do kind of an ostinato bass sounding thing. So we're going to be doing G minor, B flat major, and then D minor after that. So something that you could do would be this. You could go between G and B flat for the G minor chord. So, and And when it comes time to switch, well, we have B flat, E flat, and G to pick with. So why don't we just keep our G right where it's at, and then we can go. That'd be our G and E flat. And after that, F and D. So overall, the first guitar could play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and loop that in. Next, we'd have to look at what notes are missing from the chord, and the next guitar would take those notes. So in the case of the G minor chord, we're missing the note D. In the case of the E flat chord, the note B. In the case of the D chord, we're missing A. So D, B flat, A. There's one way to do it. Or we could add even more notes in the other guitar. There's another way of arranging this, and it sounds different. Now, these harmonies are not often used in jazz or blues, but those harmonies are just as easy to come up with. And they are, in fact, named for exactly what they are. And you can find more information on that in Music Theory in One Lesson, my best-selling book. This harmonic map is yours for free. Keep it. And you can replay this webinar as much as you like. And if you'd like to have all of this material, as well as the full Music Theory in One Lesson video series, you'll be receiving some emails about the special offer that I have running till the 15th. So if you use the coupon code webinar1 at checkout, you'll save 50% on that. Now, my music education costed about 50 grand. Now, using this coupon code, you'll get the whole Music Theory in One Lesson system for $50, which is a heck of a steal. So I totally recommend you get on board with that. As well as I offer private one-on-one coaching via Skype for anybody that is looking to write their own music. I hope everybody enjoyed this web lecture, and good luck using that harmonic map. I think it's going to do you a heck of a lot of good. And by all means, if you have any questions, I am quite easy to get a hold of. Ross at musictheoryinonelesson.com. Send me an email or just reply to any of the emails that you receive from me. Have a good day.